you, Taco, for the introduction. Let's see if I can share my screen. Okay, today I'm gonna talk about how to carry out a thermal comfort assessment at street level. It's based on 2 years research and field work together with all the Cool Towns partners in the different partners locations. And if we move on to the agenda, first I will explain a little bit about the impact of heat on the city life. What is actually heat stress and how can it affect us? I will talk about how to conduct a thermal comfort assessment on street level. We developed a methodology together with the partners. And I'm also sharing some of the first findings of the Cool Towns project. We are now 2 years already running, 2 years left, and I think we have a lot of findings we would like to share with you. First of all, the impact of heat. This graph was published last week about the mortality rates in the Netherlands. And then you can actually see that last summer, the mortality rates increases during the heat waves. So in other words, you see a relation between COVID-19, the mortality rates, and the heat wave at that time. I think there are reasons enough to start today or maybe tomorrow with redesigning the city, make it more heat resilient by developing heat stress interventions. How is it actually affecting us? It can create a decrease in mental and manual performance. It can have negative effects on our social behavior. It can create a heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And as I showed you on this graph, it may even lead to death. For further reference, see Bell, for instance, and Epstein and Moran. Well, often it's referred to children, elderly, and ill people as very vulnerable groups for heat stress. I think that's absolutely true, but there are other groups which can be mentioned, and especially related to vulnerable locations in the city. And just to make this point, just 2 examples. We did some research in the city of Breda in the Netherlands, looking at the visitors numbers to the city center in relation to the maximum temperature in 2018 compared to 2017. And what we actually saw that there was a high, well, there was a peak, so kind of heat wave in that summer of 2018, and you actually saw also a drop in visitors numbers at the time. So in other words, you already see that there's a kind of economical impact. And if we want to keep our city centers, our shopping areas viable, I think what's needed is to make it more heat resilient. And another example is it's not only the locations, but also the routes towards those locations, like shopping areas or maybe train stations, which we all use in our daily life. On the second graph, you see all kind of transport modes, and cycling appears to be the most sensitive to weather, according to Bokker and Thorsen. And what you see is that if the temperature increases, also cycling increases, but it drops after 25 degrees because I guess it's uncomfortable to cycle under hot conditions. It gives you some reasons maybe to make also the primary routes towards those daily use locations more heat resilient, developing interventions, creating cool corridors. So those are just 2 examples to show you the impact of heat and where we should maybe work on and developing solutions. How does heat affect us? There are many different factors, parameters in play. Most important one is, of course, the air temperature and the radiation, direct solar radiation or indirectly reflected by buildings. We also have the infrared radiation, some stone and other surfaces, those heat up, like from buildings and pavement, and creating infrared radiation, but also other factors are in play, like the wind. If it's windy at a location outside, even when it's hot, it's acceptable for most of us. And also humidity. If there's high humidity levels, like in the tropics, it can be quite tiring. It matters the clothing and also the kind of activity you're doing at that moment. If you're running or just relaxing and sitting, it makes a difference how you experience the heat. So all those parameters together, we call it physiological equivalent temperature. And linked to this is also an index. And it's based on the energy balance of the human body. We're using a similar indoor air temperature experience as reference. And it's good to explain this by an example. If a person experiences a PET, so the physiological equivalent temperature of 50 degrees outdoors, based on a combination of those different parameters, the equivalent indoors would be an air temperature of 50, so without the wind and solar radiation, but often the same humidity. Also linked to the PET index, you have different physiological stress grades. Nori a couple of years ago added some extreme heat stress, and it all helps you to interpret the PET values, as you can see over here. The protocol, I think Tini already mentioned it. We published actually today after this presentation a practical guide for carrying out a thermal comfort assessment at street level scale yourself. It provides practical instructions on how to evaluate and provide evidence-based justification for the selection of different cooling interventions. You can think about trees or water features, different types of shade sails, all together for climate proofing urban areas. How to assess heat in cities? There are different ways. The most common way is a thermal comfort assessment at city scale, modeling the PET for identifying heat stress locations, possible heat stress locations in the city. And you can perceive it as the first step towards a thermal comfort assessment at a street level scale, where also the thermal comfort of the users of those spaces are included. So for a TCA at street level scale, there are three different methods in play. Site characterization for exploring the use of the site, the spatial configuration, which matters and it contributes to heat stress. So those are the thermal characteristics. I mentioned already the questionnaire for get a better understanding of the thermal comfort experience of users, and also measuring the PET, the variety of heat stress levels on a site, for instance, or cooling effects of existing features like trees, or the recently installed interventions. And through different phases, from a measurement plan, conducting field work and analysis, it provides all the information to implement new heat stress mitigation strategies yourself in your municipality. So what do we need to think of with the characterization of sites? Here are some categories. We would like to know how many trees are present, so how many how much cooling interventions or cooling features are there already there? Are there more needed? What are the type of use of the site? And that's actually the starting point. And then we move on with the questionnaire to get a good understanding of the thermal comfort which has been experienced on the site. So then we actually ask them first how they are, what's their motive to go to this area. And then we follow it up with how do they perceive this environment? Do they feel comfortable or very uncomfortable due to the heat? And how are they feeling? And how would they prefer that it's to be changed? Do they think it needs to be cooler? So then you can actually see action is needed, or is it fine just the way it is? And then we also have the measuring the PET for different aims actually. Cooling effect of heat stress interventions to investigate that, the variety of heat stress levels, as I mentioned already on the site. And it needs different requirements. I think you always need to have a reference point. You have an intervention point at the center of this cooling intervention, measuring the effectiveness of this intervention. And you need comparison with a location full in the sun, in the open environment to compare it to. And we call it the reference point or a control point, which is a bit similar. And then also it needs to be far enough away from other factors like spatial elements like buildings, and also from other interventions to really measure, one hand, the intervention, and the other hand, also the reference location to compare it with. So for a TCA, it starts with a quick scan. It's optional. Using Oostand as an example, it's one of our partners of Cool Towns. We have a shopping street over here, and that's over there. We have the Cool Towns pilot site, the Lijnbaanstraat. And what we found out with modeling the PET, we saw that the shopping streets like this important one, it suffers from heat stress. Often in shopping streets, it's difficult to develop heat stress interventions. And here the partner has chosen actually to, in this area, to create a kind of cool spot where people can have a break when they are shopping and can cool down a little bit and relax a bit. So this measurement plan, there are different objectives: to develop a baseline against which to measure the need for future change, intervention measuring the effectiveness of installed interventions, and also an objective is measuring the performances of existing heat stress mitigation features. So here you see actually a map of the baseline with all the different areas of interest where the interventions will be placed. There are a lot of things you need to consider when developing a measurement plan. Most importantly, it needs to be a summer day in the afternoon when it's the hottest period of that day, with a clear sky. And there are different equipment here involved. Very important, the mobile weather station to measure the PET. And if we move on to the next, I will show you some findings of the Cool Towns project. And here we actually combined the two phases of the protocol and the TCA. Here again, we have Oostand with the baseline. We see over here the control point. So actually in the center of the place, it measured a PET of 43. And here near the wall where an intervention will be placed, it was 51 on a summer day in August. So it actually has 8 degrees higher next to the wall. So you could imagine if you have to walk there and you still have to do it after the redesign of this area. You can imagine we need to create a kind of cool pathway through the site. So this can be done by a green wall, and that's actually also the idea of the municipality, which I will show you on the next slide. We also saw that based on our questionnaire, that people would prefer it's cooler. Has the municipality done enough effort to make it comfortable? Not yet, but that's actually what the municipality is gonna do. This is the design. They are actually creating a kind of green islands, as I call them, elevated, with benches on the edges and some planted by trees and some grass and some water storage capacity underneath it. And on the edges, next to the buildings, the walls will be covered by green walls. So really to create a cool spot in the center of this shopping area. There are also other different types of spaces. We also have schools, also in our Cool Towns consortium of some pilot sites. We have residential areas like here in Kent. And we also have transport hubs, as we call them, like train stations, bus stops, like here in Middelburg. And with the last one, just to show you some results. So this is at the train station and bus terminal. You could see the control point. So without any existing heat stress features, it measured almost 49 degrees PUT. And here you see, if you look at the London plane tree, it was almost 30 PUT, and next to it 44. So you actually see it really can make a difference of almost 15 degrees cooler, an intervention like a big plane tree. And at the other side, you also have this bus stop. It cools down a bit, but the roof is made of, well, part of it of glass. And based on the questionnaire output, the people would like to have more options, more shading options here and there on the site. And this is the design of Middelburg. As you can see, they will add some more trees and more lawn, and it will be a more pedestrian-centric space. And also the bus stop, a green roof will be created over there. You don't only have a topology of different spaces, which really matter, but also a topology of different interventions. And I already mentioned a couple of them. We have cooler surfaces, like vegetated paving. We have trees, we have green walls. Our partner, Gideon Industries, partner of the project, is specialized in this. It's a company. We have some water features and shade structures like shade sails. Okay, this is just an example of some examples of cooling features. If we have a look at the city center in Merelbeke in Belgium, we have a water feature over here. And although the result, the difference of PUT here near the water and a bit further away is only 1.6 degrees difference. So it makes a difference, because if you actually walk through the water or you sit there next to it with your feet in the water, it helps you to cool down. So it actually contributes to a thermal comfortable, to make a thermal comfortable place. And on the right, you see some other examples. The partners measured, like in Breda, Saint-Omer, and another example of Breda. There are also some other cooling features like trees. If we look at Saint-Omer, we have those really huge horse chestnut trees. And of course, it depends how hot it is on that day, but it can reach a difference of 18 degrees PAT. And especially if you compare it to a site in Amsterdam, a small horse chestnut species trees, it only made a difference of 12, and it was really like a very tiny cool spot created over there. We published a protocol. You can find it right now online, but please wait till all the other presentations are finished. On cooltowns.eu protocol, you can find the whole package of, well, first of all, the protocol, but also the checklist for doing field work. There's a list of how to conduct the site characterization process, the questionnaire, what kind of questions you need to ask the users, and very soon it will follow also a PAT calculation template in Excel, so you can actually only have to fill in the value of the PAT, and it calculates automatically the PAT itself. At the moment, it's a bit complex to do that. So the next steps in Cool Towns is the installation of interventions in 2021. We are also going to measure it together with the partners. A roadmap for implementation of heat stress mitigation strategies, as Tinia already said. And we will continue to develop a decision support tool based on the pilot site and also based on the extra measurements we are conducting of existing cooling interventions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Gideon, for this, this explanation. So basically what you've shown us is that from now on, actually from this afternoon on, it will be possible for local authorities to directly get a grip on exactly how hot certain places in their city are and whether or not this actually leads to heat stress or whether it's simply pleasantly warm. Clearly, I can imagine many of the participants are eager to start working, but please wait until the end of the program, as Gideon suggested. I see that some of the participants actually would like to raise questions to you, and maybe the first one is a very interesting and practical one. I could imagine it comes from somebody in the local authority who is thinking about implementing measures to deal with heat stress. And the question is whether you have any information related to the costs of retrofitting green infrastructures in a town. Maybe you can expand on this broader and beyond green infrastructures. How do you see this?
Well, first of all, it's part of the project. We are developing a decision support tool that municipalities and other authorities can make a good judgment what kind of intervention should be placed on a certain type of space. And indeed, it matters the cost of those interventions. And although there will be some differences related per country, like in France, it can be a certain type of intervention can be more expensive to install than others. But we are working on it at the moment, and we also try to include the maintenance cost. But it's not that easy, as we found out so far.
Yeah, clearly, the same intervention might have a totally different price tag in different locations. I could also imagine, but let's hear more this afternoon, that there could be a connection with the work that's being done in the Nature Smart Cities projects on business modeling for green infrastructures, at least. So let's see where there we see certain connections.
Yeah, and it also depends on not only heat stress mitigation, how effective is it to combat heat stress, but also are there other co-benefits in place you would like to create, develop over there. So it's always very situational, I think, this approach. But even then, you could create some price ranges per intervention. Yeah, that should be possible.
There's another few questions that you might have some thoughts about that I would like to put before you, Gideon. And one is, very interestingly, do you have any information about the cooling effects, or let's say the effects in general of any heat stress reducing interventions during the colder months of the year, so the winter months? How does that work?
Yeah, We actually considered it. I mean, we are quite aware of that. You need. This is just a start, and I think it's quite important to see at those summer days, those hot days, how can you keep it climate thermally comfortable. So that's our priority at the moment. But actually, during the whole year, it needs to be comfortable. So you can't actually create in one space a lot of trees, creating a lot of shading, while in springtime or winter, you would, we all need some sunshine, right? So it could be quite interesting to start a project the whole year round, measuring the PET levels. But so far we haven't done that yet. We are focusing on combating the heat stress levels, but it's quite interesting to do so.
There's work to be done. I have one final question for you. There are more that we will probably come back to later on, but one final one that is maybe one of the core questions that cool towns could also be dealing with, and that's the question, is there more merit in planting trees over having green walls, or does one heat stress reducing intervention make more impact than the other, and how do you make choices?
Yes, but sometimes, yeah, like those really large trees, for instance, with a lot of leaf area, they are quite effective to reduce the heat stress levels. But at the same time, like in some type of open spaces, like in shopping streets, it will be quite difficult to plant trees over there. So yes, if you look at it from one single perspective, yes, you can make, you can see which one is the most effective one. But at the same time, a green wall, if you have to walk or sit really close to this wall, it can be effective to green it. Although like the effect, if you go a bit further away, like maybe 2 meters away, you won't experience it anymore. But as long as you walk it next to it, you will. So that's what I try to mention. Like it's very situational. It all this depends also on the type of space. Which intervention should be placed over there. So that's what we actually are gonna do in the making this decision support tool, actually to enhance this process rather than you already know from the beginning on which one will be the best, because that's something we can't make. We can help you to select one or a couple of best interventions which are suitable to place, but we can't take it over completely.
That's understood, Gideon. If it were only so easy, but clearly it's not. So there's a lot of work to be done at local level still. Thanks very much for this very interesting presentation.